What would you do if the only family you ever knew betrayed you and the only stranger who cared became your lifeline? This is the story of Lila, a resilient young girl who survives a harrowing past filled with cruelty and neglect, only to be saved by Ethan, a man who risks everything to protect her. Together, they embark on a journey to uncover hidden truths about their family, face unimaginable challenges, and rebuild their lives. But as dark secrets from the past begin to surface, Lila and Ethan must navigate a tangled web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Will love and hope be enough to triumph over pain? Or will the weight of the past threaten the future they've fought so hard to build? The asphalt shimmered under the weight of the sun, waves of heat distorting the air and intensifying the smell of dust and pavement. Lila Morgan walked with her head down, hugging a loaf of stale bread as if it were her lifeline. Her oversized shirt clung to her small frame, sweat dripping down her brow and soaking the frayed hem of her shorts. Every step sent sharp pain up her bare feet, but she didn't slow. The quicker she returned home, the fewer the bruises Greta would leave on her arms. The bread, Lila thought grimly, wasn't even fresh. She winced at the memory of Greta's cigarette-stained voice snapping at her that morning. "Don't come back without it, girl, or I'll show you what happens when you waste my time." Her stomach churned as she replayed those words, but she pushed them down. She had learned not to cry. Tears made Greta angrier. Halfway down the block, her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a man sprawled on the sidewalk. He was dressed too neatly for this part of town, an expensive suit, polished shoes, and a glinting watch. His face was pale, and his body was utterly still. Lila froze, her heart pounding as she scanned the street. No one else seemed to notice or care. A sharp pang of guilt twisted in her chest. She wanted to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen him, but the image of Mrs. Belby from 2 houses down, left to die alone after her fall, stopped her. Setting the bread carefully on the ground, Lila approached the man. "Mister," she whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't stir. "Please don't be dead. I can't let that happen again." Remembering how the school nurse had once checked a girl who fainted during gym class, Lila pressed her fingers to his neck. A weak pulse thrummed beneath her fingertips. Relief flooded her, and she whispered, "You're alive." She tilted his head to the side to keep his airway open, as she'd once seen in a first aid video. Then, without thinking, she propped his head on her loaf of bread to make him more comfortable. After a moment, the man's eyelids fluttered, revealing sky-blue eyes that locked onto hers. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Nobody," Lila replied quickly, her heart hammering. "Help's coming. Stay still." But the sound of distant sirens made her freeze. If Greta found out she'd talked to someone, especially a stranger, the punishment would be unbearable. Panic surged through her as she whispered urgently, "I have to go, but you'll be okay now. Promise me you won't tell anyone about me." The man's hand reached weakly for hers, his fingers brushing against her small, bruised ones. "Angel," he murmured before his hand fell limply to his side. Grabbing her loaf of bread, Lila ran as fast as her legs could carry her, disappearing into the maze of streets that led home. Greta Malone was waiting for her at the door, her cigarette dangling precariously from her lips. 3 hours for a loaf of bread? "What do you take me for, stupid?" she growled, yanking Lila inside by her arm. "I didn't mean to," Lila started, but Greta's slap silenced her. The loaf fell to the floor, scattering crumbs that Greta crushed underfoot. "Look at this mess. Do you think money grows on trees?" she screamed, grabbing Lila's face with her rough hand. "Useless. I don't know why I bother keeping you around." Lila didn't respond. She'd learned not to. Tears welled up, but she blinked them back, knowing that crying would only make Greta angrier. The other children in the house, Greta's so-called daughters, watched from the stairs. Some smirked, enjoying the spectacle. Others looked away, unwilling to risk Greta's wrath by showing pity. After throwing Lila to the floor, Greta lit another cigarette and exhaled a cloud of smoke. "You're lucky someone's interested in you, girl. He's coming tomorrow, and you'd better look presentable." Lila's blood ran cold. What do you mean?" Greta's laughter was sharp and cruel. "I mean you're not my problem anymore. Ethan Carver woke in a hospital room, the rhythmic beep of a monitor pulling him from unconsciousness. His head throbbed, and his throat felt like sandpaper. A nurse leaned over him. "You're lucky someone found you when they did," she said with a kind smile. Ethan frowned, his memory blurry. "Who?" "A little girl," the nurse replied. "She stayed long enough to make sure you were breathing, but ran off before the ambulance arrived." The image of wide brown eyes and a small, frightened face surfaced in Ethan's mind. She looked no older than 10, and her bruises had been impossible to miss. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The nurse shook her head. "No idea. She disappeared. People like her don't want attention." Ethan's chest tightened. He'd built a life out of fixing things, broken businesses, crumbling investments, but nothing had prepared him for the raw vulnerability in that girl's eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that she needed help. Against his better judgment, he asked his assistant to find out more about the neighborhood where he collapsed. Within hours, he had a name: Lila Morgan. Ethan arrived at Greta Malone's door the next morning, armed with a briefcase full of cash. Greta's eyes lit up at the sight of the money, though she feigned indifference. "You're early," she said, blowing a cloud of smoke into the air. "I'm here to take the girl," Ethan said bluntly. Greta raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "You're not the buyer I was expecting." Ethan shrugged, snapping the briefcase open to reveal stacks of neatly arranged bills. "I pay better." Greta's eyes darted between the money and the door leading to Lila's room. After a tense pause, she grabbed the briefcase. "She's yours. Take her and go." When Lila emerged, her face pale and her steps hesitant, Ethan knelt to meet her gaze. "You're safe now," he said softly. "I promise." But the fear in Lila's eyes told him it would take more than promises to undo the damage Greta had inflicted. The car ride from Greta Malone's decrepit house to Ethan's estate was long and silent. Lila sat in the back seat, clutching her threadbare backpack to her chest. Ethan watched her in the rearview mirror, noting her small, bruised arms and the hollow look in her eyes. She stared out the window, her shoulders tense as if bracing for something bad to happen. "You're safe now," Ethan said softly, his voice careful not to startle her. Lila didn't respond. She wasn't sure what safe even meant anymore. Her world had been a series of broken promises, and she wasn't ready to trust this stranger. The image of Greta's mocking laughter echoed in her head. "Safe?" Greta had sneered as she shoved Lila toward the door. "We'll see how long that lasts." As the car turned onto a tree-lined road, Lila caught sight of Ethan's estate, a sprawling, elegant house surrounded by lush gardens. It looked like something out of a storybook. "This is your house?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan smiled. "It's ours now. You'll have your own room, and no one here will hurt you. I promise." But Lila didn't reply. Promises were just words, and words could be broken. Lila stood in the foyer, overwhelmed by the opulence around her. The polished floors gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier. A woman in a sharply tailored dress descended the grand staircase, her heels clicking against the marble. Her cold blue eyes landed on Lila, and her lips pursed in disapproval. "Ethan," she said sharply, "who is this?" "This is Lila. She'll be staying with us," Ethan replied firmly. Charlotte Carver's gaze lingered on the girl's ragged clothes and bruised face. "Staying?" "Ethan, this is a bad idea. You can't just bring someone like her into our home. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble?" "That's enough, Mother," Ethan interrupted. His voice was calm, but his tone left no room for argument. Charlotte bristled, but said no more. Instead, she fixed Lila with a cold smile that sent a chill down the girl's spine. "Welcome," Charlotte said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I hope you're worth the trouble." Ethan led Lila to a cozy bedroom on the second floor. The room was painted in soft pastels, with a bed covered in a quilt that looked impossibly soft. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with colorful books. "This is your room," Ethan said, watching her carefully. "You can decorate it however you want. And if you need anything, you just have to ask." Lila stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "I can't pay you back," she whispered. "You don't have to," Ethan said gently. "You've already done more for me than you know." Lila's brow furrowed in confusion, but she didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she stepped into the room and ran her fingers over the quilt, marveling at its softness. That night, Lila lay awake in her new bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was too quiet, too clean, too kind. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a trick, that someone would burst through the door and drag her back to Greta's house. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with shadows and laughter that sounded too much like Greta's. The next morning, Lila awoke to the smell of pancakes. Hesitant but hungry, she made her way to the dining room, where Ethan was flipping pancakes at the stove. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made a little bit of everything." The table was set with pancakes, fruit, and scrambled eggs. Lila's stomach growled, but she hesitated. At Greta's house, food had always come with conditions. "Go ahead," Ethan encouraged, pulling out a chair for her. Lila sat down cautiously and reached for a pancake. When no one stopped her, she took a tentative bite. The sweetness of the syrup made her eyes widen. "Good?" Ethan asked. Lila nodded, too focused on the food to respond. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt full. As the days passed, Lila began to relax, though the scars of her past still clung to her. She flinched at loud noises and avoided eye contact with strangers. Ethan noticed these things, but didn't press her. Instead, he focused on small gestures, leaving books on her nightstand, teaching her how to make pancakes, and taking her for walks in the garden. But Charlotte's disapproval loomed over them. "I don't know why you're so attached to her," Charlotte said one evening, sipping her wine as Ethan sorted through papers in his study. "She's not your responsibility." "She is now," Ethan replied without looking up. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. "You think she'll thank you for this?" "She'll resent you, Ethan. Mark my words." Ethan set his papers aside and met his mother's gaze. "This isn't about gratitude. It's about doing what's right." Charlotte scoffed, but said no more. One afternoon, Lila sat in the garden, sketching on a notepad Ethan had given her. She was drawing a woman with long, dark hair and kind eyes. "Who's that?" Ethan asked, sitting down beside her. "My mom," Lila said softly. "I don't remember her face, but I think this is what she looked like." Ethan studied the drawing, his heart aching for the girl who had lost so much. "What do you remember about her?" "She used to sing to me," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And her hugs, they were warm, not like Greta's." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her, Lila. I promise." That evening, Ethan contacted a private investigator. "I need you to look into a woman named Vivian Harris," he said. "She's Lila's mother, and I need to find her." The days following Lila's arrival at the Carver estate passed in cautious quiet. Lila explored the sprawling house, but her steps were tentative, and her gaze always darted toward the exits. Each new kindness from Ethan, a soft quilt, a small art kit, was met with equal parts gratitude and suspicion. Charlotte Carver, however, made her disdain for Lila increasingly clear. Over breakfast one morning, she commented, "She's been here a week, Ethan. And what does she contribute to this house?" Ethan looked up sharply. "She's a child, Mother. She doesn't need to contribute. Children should learn early to pull their weight," Charlotte replied, sipping her coffee. Her cold gaze swept to Lila, who shrank in her seat. "Otherwise, they become liabilities." Lila's stomach twisted, but Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're doing just fine, Lila," he said firmly, his tone directed more at Charlotte than at the girl. One afternoon, while Lila played quietly in the garden, Ethan received a call from his investigator. "I've found something," the investigator said. "Vivian Harris, Lila's mother, was institutionalized 8 years ago. But the circumstances are questionable. You need to see this." Ethan's chest tightened as he absorbed the details. Forged documents, conflicting medical reports, and a trail leading back to Greta and, alarmingly, to his own mother. That evening, Ethan confronted Charlotte in her sitting room. "You knew," he said, holding the investigator's report in his hand. "You knew what Greta did to Lila's mother, and you didn't stop it. You even helped her." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "I did what was necessary to protect this family's reputation. That woman was a disgrace, Ethan. Pregnant by some nobody and determined to drag us all down with her. I cleaned up her mess." Ethan's hands trembled with anger. Her mess was her daughter, Mother. Lila's been suffering because of you. Charlotte stood, her expression cold. And now you're risking everything for her? Don't be naive, Ethan. That girl will never fit into this family. Ethan's voice was steel. This family doesn't deserve her. Despite the storm brewing behind closed doors, Ethan continued to focus on building trust with Lila. One evening, he invited her to help him bake cookies. I've never done this before, Lila admitted as Ethan handed her an apron. There's a first time for everything, Ethan said with a smile. As they worked, Lila's laughter began to spill out in small bursts. By the time the cookies were in the oven, she was grinning. You're pretty good at this, Ethan said, ruffling her hair. Maybe I'll be a baker, Lila replied, her voice tinged with a rare excitement. For a moment, the weight of her past seemed to lift, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope. The peace was short-lived. Late one night, the doorbell rang, and Ethan opened it to find Greta standing on the porch, her smirk as smug as ever. You've been digging into things you shouldn't, Carver, Greta said, her voice low. Vivian's better off where she is. And so's Lila, for that matter. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw tight. You don't get to decide that. Lila's safe with me now. Greta's expression darkened. Safe? You think a little money and a fancy house will erase what she's been through? You're playing savior, but you don't know what you're dealing with. Before Ethan could respond, Greta turned on her heel and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a chill that seemed to seep into the walls of the house. Ethan became increasingly protective of Lila, but Charlotte's hostility deepened. One morning, Lila overheard an argument between Ethan and his mother. She doesn't belong here, Ethan, Charlotte said sharply. You're jeopardizing everything we've built for the sake of a girl who isn't even family. She is family, Ethan shot back. She's part of this house now, whether you like it or not. Lila felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to be a source of conflict, but she also couldn't deny the warmth Ethan's words brought her. Ethan's investigator finally secured access to Vivian Harris's medical records. The details were chilling. Vivian had been institutionalized under Greta's orders, with Charlotte's assistance. She was declared unfit based on fabricated evidence, the investigator explained. But the facility director is cooperative. They'll allow you to visit her. Ethan hesitated before asking, How is she? Sedated, the investigator replied grimly. She's been heavily medicated for years. But there's hope. With the right care, she could recover. Ethan shared the news with Lila that evening. Your mom's alive, he said gently. Tears filled Lila's eyes. Can we see her? Ethan nodded. Soon. But she's not well, Lila. It might take time for her to remember everything. Lila's small hand gripped his tightly. I don't care how long it takes. I just want her back. Charlotte, sensing her influence slipping, decided to take matters into her own hands. One evening, as Lila descended the grand staircase, Charlotte approached her. You've caused enough trouble, don't you think? Charlotte said, her tone icy. Lila froze, her heart pounding. I didn't mean to. Before she could finish, Charlotte's hand shot out, shoving her backward. The world tilted as Lila tumbled down the marble steps, her small body landing with a sickening thud at the bottom. Charlotte's breath hitched, and for a moment, she stood frozen. Then she turned and fled, leaving Lila unconscious at the foot of the stairs. Ethan returned home to find the house in chaos. Lila was being loaded into an ambulance, her face pale and her breathing shallow. What happened? He demanded, his voice thick with fear. A maid hesitated before saying, It was Mrs. Carver. Ethan's chest tightened. She pushed her? The maid nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She said it was an accident, but Ethan clenched his fists, rage and despair warring within him. Climbing into the ambulance, he took Lila's hand in his. Stay with me, kiddo, he whispered. We'll get through this. The beeping of monitors was the first sound Lila registered as she blinked awake in the hospital room. The sterile white walls and faint antiseptic smell disoriented her, but Ethan's familiar voice grounded her. Lila, he said softly, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He leaned closer, his face etched with worry. You're awake. Thank God. What happened? Lila's voice was barely a whisper. Her body felt heavy, and a dull ache radiated from her side. "You fell," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "But you're safe now. The doctors are taking good care of you." Lila's brows furrowed. Flashes of memory surfaced: the cold marble steps, Charlotte's sharp voice, the overwhelming sensation of falling. "She pushed me," she murmured, tears filling her eyes. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You don't have to worry about her anymore. I'm handling it." Lila's small hand reached for his, her grip weak but insistent. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan promised, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. Charlotte sat in the estate's grand sitting room, her composure carefully maintained. When Ethan stormed in, his face dark with fury, she rose to meet him. "Ethan, I know what this is about." "You pushed her," Ethan interrupted, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. "My God, Mother, she's just a child." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. She was becoming a threat to this family's stability. "You don't see it now, but I was protecting us." "Protecting us?" Ethan echoed, incredulous. "You nearly killed her. And for what? To save your precious reputation." Charlotte's lips thinned. "You've always been soft, Ethan, always letting emotions cloud your judgment. That girl doesn't belong here." Ethan's voice was steel. "You're wrong. She belongs here more than you ever did." Charlotte's mask of calm cracked, but before she could respond, Ethan added, "I'm filing a restraining order. You're not welcome here anymore." Her laughter was sharp and bitter. "You think you can replace me with her? Fine, Ethan. But when she turns on you, don't say, 'I didn't warn you.'" In the days that followed, Lila's recovery was slow but steady. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, and each step she took was a victory hard won. Ethan was with her every step of the way, offering encouragement and support. "You're doing amazing, Lila," he said one afternoon as she managed a shaky walk across the therapy room. "It hurts," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I know it does," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "But you're stronger than the pain. You've already survived so much." Lila's lips quivered, but she nodded. Her determination shone through the tears. One evening, Ethan received a call from the investigator. "We've finalized the paperwork. You can see Vivian Harris tomorrow." Ethan hesitated before replying. "How is she?" "Still disoriented, but the reduced medication is helping. She's been asking about her daughter." The next day, Ethan took Lila to the facility. The drive was quiet, the weight of anticipation thick in the air. Lila clutched the sketch of her mother she had drawn weeks earlier, her small hands trembling. "Do you think she'll recognize me?" Lila asked, her voice barely audible. "I think she's been waiting for this moment as long as you have," Ethan said. When they entered Vivian's room, Lila froze. The woman sitting by the window was thinner and frilier than the mother she had imagined, but her face so much like Lila's brought tears to her eyes. Vivian turned slowly, her gaze meeting Lila's. For a moment, there was silence. Then, her trembling voice broke through. "Lila!" Lila ran to her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mommy, it's me." Vivian's arms wrapped around her daughter, and for the first time in years, the emptiness in her heart began to fill. Vivian's recovery was slow, but each day brought progress. She and Lila spent hours talking, piecing together the years they had lost. "I never stopped thinking about you," Vivian said one afternoon as they walked through the estate's garden. "They told me you were gone, but I never believed them." Lila held her mother's hand tightly. "I thought you didn't want me," she admitted, her voice shaking. Vivian knelt in front of her, tears streaming down her face. "Never. You were my reason to keep going." Ethan watched from a distance, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but seeing Lila and Vivian together made every battle worth it. The day of Charlotte's court hearing arrived, and Ethan took the stand to testify against her. His voice was steady as he recounted her actions and the harm she had caused. "She jeopardized the life of an innocent child," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. "She doesn't deserve the power or influence she once wielded." Charlotte's defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence, and the judge ruled in favor of Ethan's restraining order. As Charlotte was escorted out of the courtroom, she turned to Ethan. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed. Ethan met her gaze with calm resolve. "No, Mother. I've saved it." Back at the estate, Lila and Vivian began building a new life together. The pain of the past lingered, but so did the hope for a brighter future. One evening, as the sun set over the garden, Ethan joined them for dinner. Lila laughed as she recounted a story from her day, and Vivian's smile was the brightest Ethan had ever seen. "You've given us more than a home, Ethan," Vivian said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've given us hope." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "You gave me the same, Vivian. We're family now, and nothing will change that." The Carver estate began to feel like a sanctuary for Lila and Vivian. Ethan worked tirelessly to ensure their safety and stability, but the scars of the past still cast long shadows. One afternoon, Lila approached Ethan in his study, clutching a faded envelope she had found tucked inside a book from her mother's things. "What's this?" she asked, her voice small. Ethan examined the envelope, his brow furrowing. It was addressed to Vivian Harris, but the return address was unfamiliar. Inside was a single letter, its ink faded but still legible. As Ethan read, his expression hardened. "It's from someone named Daniel Moore," he said, glancing at Vivian, who had entered the room moments before. Vivian's face went pale. "Daniel, he was Lila's father," she whispered. The room fell silent as the weight of the revelation sank in. The letter detailed Daniel's desperate attempts to contact Vivian after her disappearance. It also mentioned unsettling details about Charlotte and Greta's involvement in separating him from his family. "They told me you had left willingly," the letter read, "that you didn't want to raise our child. But I don't believe them. I'll keep searching, Vivian. I'll find you both." Ethan set the letter down, his fists clenched. "He was trying to find you," he said. "They lied to him, just like they lied to you." Vivian's tears fell freely. "I thought he abandoned us. I thought I was alone." Lila hugged her mother tightly. "We're not alone anymore," she said. Ethan decided. "We need to find him," he said. "If he's alive, he deserves to know the truth." Ethan contacted his investigator, who began tracing Daniel Moore's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Ethan, Lila, and Vivian worked to rebuild their lives. Each step forward was met with small victories: Vivian planting flowers in the garden, Lila mastering a new recipe, and Ethan learning to let his walls down. But the past loomed large, and the search for Daniel brought mixed emotions. "What if he doesn't want to see us?" Vivian asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Ethan shook his head. "From that letter, it's clear he never stopped wanting to find you. We owe him the chance to decide for himself." As the search for Daniel continued, Ethan received a call from the authorities. Greta had been arrested on charges unrelated to their case, but during questioning, she had made a startling confession. She had forged the documents that institutionalized Vivian. Ethan visited Greta in jail, his emotions a mixture of anger and determination. "Why did you do it?" he demanded. Greta smirked. "Money, of course. Your mother paid me handsomely to get rid of Vivian. But I'll admit, it was satisfying seeing her perfect little life crumble." "You ruin lives," Ethan said, his voice cold. Greta leaned forward. "And what are you going to do about it, Carver? You think locking me up will fix what's broken?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No, but it's a start." After weeks of searching, the investigator located Daniel Moore in a small town several states away. He worked as a mechanic and had never stopped searching for Vivian and Lila, though his resources were limited. Ethan arranged for a meeting at a quiet cafe. When Daniel walked in, his rugged appearance and tired eyes told the story of a man who had faced countless disappointments but never lost hope. "Ethan Carver?" he asked, his voice cautious. Ethan nodded. "I have someone you need to meet." Moments later, Vivian and Lila entered. Daniel froze, his breath catching as his eyes met Vivian's. "Vivian," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Daniel," she replied, tears streaming down her face. Lila stepped forward hesitantly. "Dad?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he knelt before her. "Lila, my little girl." The reunion was overwhelming, filled with tears, laughter, and years of pain finally given a voice. The days following Daniel's return were bittersweet. While the family began to reconnect, the years of separation left gaps that were hard to fill. Lila struggled to trust a father she had never known, and Vivian wrestled with guilt over believing the lies that kept them apart. "Why didn't you find us sooner?" Lila asked one evening, her voice tinged with frustration. Daniel sighed, his gaze heavy with regret. "I tried, sweetheart. Every lead I followed turned into a dead end. Your grandmother made sure I couldn't find you." "But you never gave up?" Lila asked, her voice softening. "Never," Daniel said, "and I never will." Charlotte's trial for her role in the forgery and neglect began shortly after Daniel's reunion with the family. The evidence was damning, and Ethan testified with a calm but fiery resolve. "My mother valued reputation over humanity," Ethan said. "She let her fear of scandal destroy lives, but she won't destroy this family anymore." The court found Charlotte guilty, and she was sentenced to years of community service and public restitution. The verdict brought a sense of closure, but also a bittersweet finality. "She'll never change," Ethan said to Vivian afterward. "But at least she can't hurt anyone else." Months later, the Carver estate was a place of laughter and light. Vivian and Daniel decided to stay nearby, rebuilding their relationship and providing Lila with the stability she had long craved. Ethan remained a constant presence, his bond with Lila as strong as ever. One evening, as the family gathered around a bonfire in the garden, Lila looked around at the faces of her parents and Ethan. "I didn't think this was possible," she said. "But it's real, isn't it?" "It's real," Vivian said, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "And it's ours." Ethan raised a toast. "To family, the one we're born into and the one we choose." As the fire crackled and laughter filled the air, the scars of the past began to fade, replaced by a future filled with hope and love. Despite the victories, Charlotte's trial, Greta's imprisonment, and the reunion with Daniel, Lila wrestled with a strange heaviness. At night, in the quiet of her room, she found herself grappling with memories that surfaced unbidden. Greta's cold voice, the biting winter she spent shivering in silence, and the gut-wrenching moment on the stairs when Charlotte pushed her. Her thoughts grew louder as she replayed her father's heartfelt words. "I never gave up searching for you." A question she had avoided for weeks finally surfaced. What if I never feel normal again? One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Lila couldn't hide her struggle any longer. Her fork clattered against her plate, and her hands trembled. "Lila," Vivian's voice was soft, but edged with worry. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. I don't know how to be happy like everyone else. It's too hard." Ethan knelt beside her chair, his hand warm and steady on hers. "It's okay to feel this way, Lila. You've been through so much. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about learning to carry it differently." Daniel leaned forward. "We'll carry it with you, sweetheart. You're not alone in this." Lila's tears spilled over, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were the release of a burden she had been too afraid to share. Ethan arranged for Lila and Vivian to see a trauma therapist, Dr. Grace Hollis, who specialized in family recovery. Their first session was quiet, with Lila hesitant to speak and Vivian's guilt palpable. "I don't want to talk about the bad stuff," Lila said. "I just wanted to go away." Dr. Grace nodded. "I understand, Lila, but sometimes talking about the bad stuff makes it smaller. It gives us the power instead of letting it control us." Over time, their sessions became more comfortable. Lila started to open up about her fears, and Vivian began confronting the shame she felt for believing Greta's lies. Together, they took the first steps toward healing not as individuals, but as a family. With Charlotte gone, the Carver estate began to transform. Ethan had the entire property remodeled, tearing down walls that seemed to hold the weight of the past. "This house should be a home," he told the contractors, "not a reminder of everything we've been through." He turned the vast dining room into an art studio for Lila, where her drawings began to reflect her newfound hope. Sunflowers became her favorite subject, bright, resilient, always seeking the light. Vivian and Daniel took over the greenhouse, where they worked side by side to grow vegetables and flowers. The physical labor became a form of therapy, grounding them in the present. Ethan found solace in the kitchen, where he and Lila often experimented with recipes. "You'd make a great chef," he told her one evening as they baked cookies. Lila beamed. Maybe I will. And you could be my taste tester. One rainy afternoon, Daniel found an old box of photographs in the attic. The pictures were faded, but they captured moments of joy. Vivian holding a baby Lila, Daniel smiling proudly beside them, and even Ethan as a younger man. "I thought these were lost," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the photos. "You look so happy," she said, tracing her mother's smile on one of the pictures. "We were," Daniel said, "and we could be again." Vivian pulled Lila close. "We already are, sweetheart. We're just learning how to show it." Ethan decided to visit Greta in prison, determined to understand the depths of her cruelty. He found her sitting in the visitation room, her sharp features dulled by time and confinement. "Carver," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Come to gloat?" "No, Ethan de. I came for answers." "You ruin lives, Greta." "Why? Was it really just for money?" Greta smirked. "Money's a good start. But let's not pretend your mother didn't play her part. She wanted your sister gone, and I was happy to help." "You're trying to deflect," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "But you've lost, Greta. Whatever power you thought you had, it's gone." Greta's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Maybe, but you'll carry your family's sins forever, Carver. Good luck living with that." Ethan left without another word, resolved to break the cycle of pain Greta had perpetuated. Charlotte, now living in a small apartment as part of her court-mandated restitution, reached out to Ethan, asking for a meeting. Against his better judgment, he agreed. When he arrived, she looked smaller, her once commanding presence diminished. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice wavering. "I know I've done terrible things, but I was trying to protect this family." Ethan stared at her, his emotions warring. "You weren't protecting the family, Mother. You were protecting yourself. And in the process, you destroyed everything you claimed to care about." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "Can you ever forgive me?" Ethan's voice was steady. "I can forgive you, but I won't forget. And I won't let you back into Lila's life. She deserves better." With the past finally confronted, the Carver estate became a beacon of hope. Vivian and Daniel officially moved in, and the family began creating new traditions. One evening, they hosted a dinner for the entire staff, an act of gratitude for their loyalty during difficult times. Lila helped Ethan prepare the meal, her laughter filling the kitchen. As the family sat around the table, Vivian raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to the family we've built together." Lila smiled, her heart full. "To family." Ethan clinked glasses with her. "To family." Months had passed since Charlotte's trial and Greta's imprisonment. The Carver estate had transformed into a vibrant sanctuary, with laughter echoing in its halls. Vivian had taken up painting, filling the house with bright canvases of flowers and landscapes. Lila was thriving in her new school, excelling in art, and even making friends. One morning, Lila bounded into the kitchen where Ethan and Vivian were sipping coffee. "Guess what? The school's having an art showcase next month, and my teacher wants me to submit something," she announced, her eyes shining. "That's amazing, Lila," Ethan said, high-fiving her. Vivian smiled. "What will you paint?" Lila thought for a moment. "Something about family." Vivian's eyes glistened as she hugged her daughter. Ethan had made it his mission to help Lila and Vivian heal, but he was beginning to recognize his own need for closure. One day, he found himself standing in the old family study, a room filled with relics of the Carver legacy. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph of himself and Charlotte, taken when he was just a boy. For a moment, he felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, she had once been a mother who read him bedtime stories and kissed him goodnight. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting," Ethan murmured. He placed the photo in a new frame and tucked it away in a corner of the estate's library, a small tribute to the complex history of their family. Daniel was adjusting to life at the estate, but he often felt like a guest rather than a permanent resident. One evening, he approached Ethan while they were grilling on the patio. "Thank you for taking care of them," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan glanced at him. "You don't have to thank me. They're my family too." Daniel nodded. "I know I wasn't there for them, but I'm here now, and I want to prove that I belong in their lives." You already do, Ethan said. It's not about making up for the past. It's about showing up now. Daniel's resolve strengthened. He began taking Lila on outings, visits to the park, fishing trips, and even art supply shopping. Slowly but surely, their bond deepened. As the art showcase approached, Lila spent hours in her studio, carefully crafting her piece. The painting depicted a field of sunflowers, their bright yellow petals turned toward a glowing sun. In the foreground stood three figures holding hands: a mother, a daughter, and a man with his arms around them both. On the day of the showcase, Ethan, Vivian, and Daniel stood proudly as Lila's painting was unveiled. The crowd murmured in admiration, but it was the smiles on her family's faces that meant the most to Lila. "You've captured us perfectly," Vivian said, tears in her eyes. Lila beamed. "It's because we're finally whole." One evening, Ethan found Vivian sitting in the greenhouse, her hands tracing the leaves of a plant she had recently nurtured to life. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, sitting beside her. Vivian smiled faintly. "I've been thinking about everything, how far we've come, how much we've lost. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling guilty for believing their lies." Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You were manipulated, Vivian. That guilt doesn't belong to you. What matters is that you're here now, and Lila knows you love her." Vivian nodded, her eyes misty. "And I'll spend every day proving it to her." Lila had always struggled with trust, but at her new school, she met Emily, a bubbly girl who shared her love of art. The two became fast friends, spending afternoons sketching and sharing stories. One day, Emily visited the Carver estate for the first time. "Your house is like a castle," Emily exclaimed. Lila laughed. "It didn't always feel that way, but now it's home." Watching the girls play, Ethan felt a pang of pride. Lila was blossoming, her laughter a constant reminder of the progress they had all made. To celebrate Lila's achievements and the family's new beginning, Ethan decided to host a garden party. Friends, neighbors, and schoolmates filled the estate's sprawling grounds, enjoying food, music, and laughter. Lila ran around with Emily, showing her the studio and greenhouse. Meanwhile, Vivian and Daniel mingled with the guests, their smiles genuine and carefree. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart full. This was the life he had always wanted for them, a life free from the shadows of the past. On the eve of the garden party, a letter arrived at the estate. It was from Charlotte. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," the letter read, "but I want you to know that I'm trying to change. I hope one day you can remember the good parts of me." Ethan folded the letter carefully. He wasn't ready to forgive, but he felt a small flicker of hope that even Charlotte could find redemption in her own time. As the sun set on the day of the party, Ethan gathered everyone on the lawn for a family photo. Lila stood between Vivian and Daniel, her arms around them both, while Ethan stood proudly beside them. The photographer snapped the picture just as Lila burst into laughter. "This is the happiest day ever," she said. In the weeks that followed, the family settled into a rhythm. Vivian and Daniel began volunteering at a local shelter, helping families who had been through similar struggles. Ethan continued running the Carver Enterprises, but he made time for what mattered most: family. One evening, as they sat around the fire pit in the garden, Lila looked at her family and said, "I used to think happy endings weren't real, but now I know they're just new beginnings." Vivian smiled, pulling her daughter close. "And we'll write ours together." As the stars twinkled overhead, the Carver family embraced the life they had rebuilt, stronger, brighter, and filled with love. As the days passed, the family's healing journey deepened. Lila began incorporating moments from her life into her art. Her sketchbook filled with vivid scenes: the greenhouse where Vivian and Daniel worked together, the sunlit kitchen where Ethan taught her to bake, and the sprawling garden where she felt free to dream. One evening, as Lila worked on a particularly detailed drawing, Vivian joined her. "What's this one about?" Vivian asked, peering over her shoulder. Lila smiled. "It's all of us at the garden party. I wanted to capture how happy we looked." Vivian hugged her daughter tightly. "You don't just capture happiness, Lila, you create it." Ethan had been reflecting on his role in the family. Though he had stepped in to protect Vivian and Lila, he realized he needed to trust that they could stand strong on their own. During breakfast one morning, Ethan announced he was stepping back from managing the estate's affairs. "I'm not going anywhere," he reassured them. "But I want to focus more on what matters, being here, being present." Lila beamed. "Does that mean more baking lessons?" Ethan laughed. "Absolutely." As Vivian grew stronger, she began to consider how she could contribute to the community that had supported her. She approached Ethan one afternoon with an idea. "I want to start a support group," she said, "for people like me, survivors of manipulation, abuse, and betrayal." Ethan nodded. "I think that's a brilliant idea. You'll help so many people." Vivian's support group quickly gained momentum, meeting weekly in the estate's newly renovated library. Sharing her story gave her a sense of purpose and allowed her to connect with others on similar journeys. The start of a new school year brought fresh opportunities for Lila. Her art teacher encouraged her to enter a statewide competition, and for the first time, she felt confident enough to accept. "Do you think I can win?" she asked Ethan as they sat on the porch one evening. Ethan smiled. "I think you've already won, Lila. Just putting yourself out there is a victory." Lila's submission, a portrait of a sunflower field under a brilliant sunrise, earned her first place. At the awards ceremony, she stood on stage, holding her ribbon, and looked out at her family cheering for her. Daniel proposed turning the estate's greenhouse into a community garden, inviting local families to grow their own vegetables and flowers. Vivian and Lila loved the idea, and soon the garden was bustling with activity. One day, as Lila helped a young boy plant tomatoes, she realized how far she had come. "Can we add sunflowers over there?" the boy asked. Lila nodded. "Sunflowers are the best. They remind us to always look for the light." One evening, Ethan found another letter from Charlotte in his mailbox. This time, it was different, less defensive, more reflective. "I've started volunteering at a shelter," she wrote. "Helping others has made me realize how much I failed you and our family. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope to become someone you can respect again." Ethan read the letter to Vivian, who nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe she's trying to change," Vivian said. "Maybe," Ethan replied. "But trust takes time." As the holidays approached, the family decided to host a Thanksgiving dinner for their friends and neighbors. Lila took charge of the decorations, filling the house with hand-painted place cards and garlands of leaves. On Thanksgiving Day, the dining room was filled with warmth and laughter. As the family gathered for the meal, Lila raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To family," she said, "and to always finding the light." In the new year, Ethan received unexpected news. Charlotte wanted to meet with him. After much consideration, he agreed. When they met at a local cafe, Ethan noticed how much his mother had changed. She looked smaller, more subdued, but her eyes held a sincerity he hadn't seen in years. "I can't undo the past," she said, "but I want to make amends however I can." Ethan listened, his emotions conflicted. "I'm willing to give you a chance," he said, "but Lila's safety comes first." Charlotte nodded. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Months later, the Carver estate was thriving. The community garden was flourishing, Vivian's support group had grown, and Lila was preparing for her first solo art show. One evening, as the family sat around a bonfire in the garden, Lila turned to Ethan. "Do you think we'll ever forget the bad stuff?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, but we'll remember the good stuff more, and we'll keep building a life that's worth remembering." On the night of Lila's art show, the gallery was packed with visitors admiring her work. Her final piece, a massive canvas of a sunflower field with a glowing horizon, was the centerpiece. "This one's called Home," Lila explained to the crowd, "because no matter where you come from or what you've been through, you can always find your way back to the light." As the audience applauded, Lila looked out at her family, Ethan, Vivian, and Daniel, all beaming with pride. For the first time in years, Lila felt truly at peace. The Carver family returned home after Lila's art show, the energy of the evening still buzzing in the air. The living room glowed warmly, filled with bouquets and congratulations from friends and supporters. "Uncle Ethan, did you see how many people love my sunflower painting?" Lila asked as she carried her ribbon to the mantel. Ethan knelt beside her, his voice steady and proud. "I did, Lila. You've inspired so many people, and not just with your art. Your strength tells a story all its own. Vivian placed her hand on Lila's shoulder, her smile soft and full of emotion. You've taught us all how to find beauty even in the hardest times. The community garden was now a thriving space of collaboration and joy. Families gathered to share stories. Children played among the rows of vegetables, and Lila's sunflowers stood tall, a golden beacon of hope. One Saturday, a local reporter visited to write an article about the project. Daniel, Vivian, and Lila walked the rows, proudly showing off the garden's bounty. This place isn't just about plants, Daniel said, his voice steady. It's about growing together, finding strength as a community. Lila added, the sunflowers are my favorite. They remind me that no matter what happens, we can always turn toward the light. Charlotte's efforts to reconnect with the family were cautious and slow. She began attending Vivian's support group, sharing her struggles and listening to others. While Vivian remained wary, she couldn't deny that Charlotte was trying to change. One evening, Charlotte asked to meet with Lila. I understand if you don't want to see me, Charlotte wrote in a note, but I would like the chance to apologize. After a long conversation with Ethan and Vivian, Lila agreed. The meeting was awkward at first, but as Charlotte spoke with genuine remorse, Lila felt some of her anger soften. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Lila said, her voice trembling. But I'll try. Ethan proposed a family trip to the mountains, a chance to leave behind the weight of the past and enjoy each other's company. Lila's excitement was contagious. Can we go hiking? And stargazing? Oh, and I want to bring my sketchbook. As they packed the car, Vivian watched her daughter's joyful anticipation with gratitude. The trip became a collection of simple, precious moments. Lila's laughter as she splashed in a mountain stream, Vivian sketching the view beside her daughter, and Ethan and Daniel attempting to build the perfect campfire. During the trip, Vivian suggested a symbolic gesture to help them move forward. At the edge of a tranquil lake, she handed each family member a small stone. This stone represents something you want to let go of, Vivian explained. Something that no longer serves you. One by one, they tossed their stones into the water. Lila's splash was the smallest, but her smile afterward was the brightest. I let go of my fear, she said softly. As the months passed, Charlotte continued to work on rebuilding trust. She volunteered at the community garden, quietly tending to the sunflowers. Lila began to notice her efforts, and slowly, their relationship warmed. One afternoon, Lila approached Charlotte with a small potted sunflower. This is for you, Lila said. Sunflowers always find the light. Maybe we can too. Charlotte's tears spilled over as she hugged Lila. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll do everything I can to earn this. To celebrate the garden's success, the family hosted a gala in the greenhouse, inviting neighbors and supporters. The space was transformed with string lights and colorful arrangements of flowers. Lila stood on a small stage, presenting her newest painting, a vibrant depiction of the community garden, with sunflowers stretching toward the sky. This is for everyone who helped us grow, she said, her voice clear and confident. One evening, Lila found Ethan sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars. She joined him, curling up under his arm. Do you think we'll always be this happy? She asked. Ethan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Happiness isn't something you get and keep, Lila. It's something you build day by day. And as long as we're together, I think we'll be just fine. Vivian began working on a book about her experiences, hoping to help others who had faced similar challenges. She dedicated the first chapter to Lila, calling her the light that never dimmed. Ethan supported her every step of the way, proud of the strength she showed in sharing her story. Your words will change lives, he said one evening, placing a hand on hers. They already have, Vivian replied, glancing at Lila, who was painting in the next room. As the seasons changed, so did the Carver family. They continued to grow, laugh, and support each other, forging a future filled with hope. On a warm spring morning, Lila stood in the garden, her face tilted toward the sun. She felt the gentle breeze against her skin and heard the laughter of her family in the distance. For the first time in years, Lila felt truly free. We did it, she whispered to herself. We found the light. and as the sunflower swayed around her, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength and love to face them. The Carver family's influence continued to ripple through the community. The garden had grown into more than a shared space. It was now a symbol of resilience and cooperation. Families worked together to host events, like workshops on sustainable gardening and craft fairs featuring local artists. Lila often painted in the garden, surrounded by her mother and the friends she had made. Her latest piece, a mural on the garden wall, featured a field of sunflowers with their faces turned toward the sky. "Do you think they'll like it?" Lila asked as Ethan and Vivian admired her work. Vivian pulled her daughter into a hug. "They'll love it, Lila. It's a reflection of everything we've built together." Charlotte, still working to rebuild trust, had taken on a quiet but impactful role in the garden. She organized planting schedules and mentored families new to gardening. One day, Vivian found her tending to a row of flowers. "Thank you for helping," Vivian said cautiously. Charlotte looked up, her expression earnest. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to be part of the good you're creating here." Vivian nodded. "Actions speak louder than words. Keep showing us who you are now." Lila's school announced a summer art camp, and Ethan encouraged her to apply. "You'll meet other kids who love art as much as you do," he said. The idea excited Lila, but also made her nervous. "What if they don't like me?" Vivian knelt beside her. "Just be yourself, Lila. Your kindness and creativity will shine through." At camp, Lila quickly made friends and even won the award for Most Creative Piece with a painting of her family in the sunflower garden. One day, Ethan received a letter from an unexpected source, Greta, writing from prison. The letter was apologetic but vague, expressing regret for her actions without fully taking responsibility. Ethan read it carefully, then set it aside. When Vivian asked about it, he said, "It's not about forgiveness for her. It's about moving forward for us." The one-year anniversary of the community garden was approaching, and the Carvers decided to celebrate with a festival. The event featured live music, food stalls, and an art exhibition showcasing Lila's and others' work. At the festival, Ethan gave a speech. "This garden is proof that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way to grow toward the light," he said. The crowd erupted in applause, and Lila felt a swell of pride for her family. As the festival wound down, a car pulled up to the estate. Out stepped Claire, a childhood friend of Vivian's who had read about the Carver's journey in a local newspaper. "Vivian? It's been so long," Claire said, pulling her into a warm embrace. The reunion rekindled old memories and brought a fresh perspective to Vivian's life. Claire, a social worker, offered to help expand Vivian's support group, turning it into a non-profit organization. "This could help so many people," Vivian said to Ethan later that night. "And it's all because of you," he replied. Lila's art teacher arranged for her work to be featured in a local gallery, a major milestone for the young artist. The gallery opening was packed with supporters, including her family and school friends. Lila's final piece, a vibrant portrayal of the garden under a starlit sky, drew the most attention. "This one is about hope," Lila explained to a guest. "Because no matter how dark things get, there's always light if you look for it." Charlotte continued to work on herself, attending therapy and volunteering at shelters. Though the road was long, she began to regain small pieces of trust from her family. One day, Lila approached her with a sketchbook. "Will you help me design a new mural for the garden?" Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love to." Together, they sketched a design featuring a large sunflower encircled by symbols of community and family. One evening, the family gathered in the garden for a bonfire. Lila sat between Ethan and Vivian, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Ethan raised his glass. "To us, our family, our community, and the strength we've found together." "To us," they echoed, clinking glasses. The fire crackled, casting warm light on their faces. For the first time, it felt like the pain of the past had truly given way to a brighter future. Years later, the Carver estate was known not just for its beauty, but for the lives it had touched. The garden had become a symbol of healing, visited by people from all over seeking inspiration. Lila, now a celebrated artist, often returned to the estate to paint and reflect. One sunny afternoon, as she walked through the rows of sunflowers with her sketchbook, she paused to look back at the house. Her family stood on the porch, waving. With a smile, Lila whispered, "We did it. We found the light." And as the sunflowers swayed in the breeze, the Carver family's story of resilience and love continued to grow. As Lila walked through the sunflower garden, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers, she turned to her family with a radiant smile. "You know," she said, "there's so much we've been through, but sharing our story has made everything worthwhile." Vivian nodded, placing a hand on Lila's shoulder. Stories like ours remind people that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to find the light. Ethan chuckled. And who knows? Maybe someone out there needs to hear this story to spark their own hope. If you've been moved by this story of resilience and love, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share inspiring stories like this every week, filled with powerful lessons and heartfelt moments. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that could brighten your day or spark a new perspective. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next story.